Hi everyone, I am Dr. Mary Magoulick at Georgia College, and this is going to be a presentation on feminist sci-fi and hope punk, which I will start sharing the PowerPoint for. There we are, hopefully you can see that. And these are the books I'm going to be talking about by Madeline Miller and N.K. Jemisin. So we're going to start with Circe, who is a goddess from Greek mythology, and you can see some various depictions throughout here. I'm just going to put depictions of her that are from all different time periods that were available online. And you can see how she was considered by Homer. She's not actually so terrible in Homer as what she becomes in later centuries as writers continue thinking and writing about her. She's the witch who transforms his men into pigs. And you can see that in these kinds of depictions. And then what I'm really going to focus on is Madeline Miller's 2018 novel, Circe, that treats the character, all of the gods and all of the heroes of Greek myth as real. And this minor Greek goddess becomes her main character now. She is subjected to millennia of control and sort of abuse in her father's obsidian halls for the first 10,000 years or so of her existence. And she gives these sort of not very positive portrayals of the gods, that they believe everything is about them. They're very arrogant and spoiled, and I'll come back to that. When she first starts to manifest her magical powers as a witch, this is something different from the way these gods understand their powers. And so she is feared, and she's exiled to Aia, this island where she thrives. She says, as she steps onto the island in her exile, which is meant to be a terrible punishment and a humiliation, she says, I felt a giddy spark of hope. I stepped into those woods and my life began. And what begins is her life as a witch. So pharmaca is the phrase used for the kind of magical power that she develops on the island, where she can take various substances from nature and mix them together, and then also using language, she works her will on it. And she emphasizes that a lot of it has to do with will. So you can see in the quotes here in yellow, oops, that it's not like godly power, which is just the blink of an eye. It takes a lot of work and a lot of will, and I have to pay attention throughout it or it's not going to work. So will is really a key to all of this. She also tells us that her name means hawk for her yellow eyes, and she's basically apparently inherited her father's eyes and some of his all-seeing nature, right? He's the sun, he sees everything. And this is what she sees of the gods, what you see reflected on the screen. It's pretty negative. The gods are petty and selfish and childish and not pleasant. And so she's also unusual in feeling compassion for Prometheus. When all the other gods laugh at his punishment for having dared to help mortals, and he's tortured in front of them, they're giddy and titillated by it. But she stays after everybody else has been bored. She gives him some nectar, and she asks him, what are mortals' life? And his answer, as you can see in the quotes here, causes excitement in her. And so she eventually, although she suffers greatly on her island, she's raped at one point, and then eventually, after her throat is no longer crushed and she can speak, she turns her rapists into pigs. So this is her first transformation of that kind, and maybe explains why she was worried. Maybe Odysseus's soldiers were going to treat her similarly. Anyway, she eventually also gets pregnant by Odysseus and bears his son, but it's a very, very difficult thing because we later learn that Athena has intervened to try to keep her from giving birth to the son because of the prophecy that that son would lead to Odysseus's death. And he's also a terrible baby. And so she does suffer quite a bit in various ways throughout the novel. And in the end, she chooses to become human. She has a flower that she had found many years earlier on another island, and she manages to make an elixir out of them that she drinks and at the very end of the novel, and we assume this is going to obey her will, since we know that magic is mostly will, and she will become human. So themes of mortal potential have shaped her whole life, and Miller reimagines this traditionally sort of perceived and portrayed evil, tricky, transgressive, excess character into something different. And she trains herself to follow a different way, and she finds space in her solitude. Oops, let me go back one slide, to use her powers to become what she wants to be. Now, there are issues with this novel, I think, in being a little bit conventional in some of the choices that Circe makes, conventional women's choices like being a mother and being married and so on. But this powerful woman builds a worthy life. She rights her wrongs, she owns her faults, she claims her joys, and there's a lot of details that show all of these things that I haven't had time to talk about. But read the novel to see them, because they're very well done. And she emerges out of pain, loneliness, exile, scorn, punishment, and solitude to embrace her vision of happiness. Many powerful, isolated women have suffered, been tormented, borne blame, and in our world, this is a reality, especially for powerful, aggressive women. And this powerful woman persists in spite of millennia of hatred, mistreatment, and spite. She takes responsibility for her mistakes. She rejects easy rewards and fame, and she tends her garden, and out of that builds a home and a life of her choice, showing great agency and wisdom, more so than most Hollywood goddesses. And in the fuller work that this is part of, I demonstrate that. We like Circe, we like her character and her choices. She's good-hearted, wise, and kind, and she shows the hard work and will it takes for women to be independent and strong, not only in her world, but also in our world. Given what we know of history, it is a kind of magic for women today to be able to carve out independent spaces through hard work, to embrace new power, to use our voices, and to enact our will. The next character and writer we're going to talk about are N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy and Essun. You see her name here in the middle of the slide. This is a really complex world, you know, of 3 really long books, so I'm not going to be able to give you all of the details. But Essun is part of a group of people in her world who have a genetic trait that lets them control the earth in a kind of magical way. The earth itself has like this magical power that can show up not only in things like earthquakes and stuff, but it actually can like be used to fuel the planet. And Essun and her kind, Origines, are controlled by an organization known as the Fulcrum, who really abuses them in some ways. And as the novel opens, a season, which is a terrible cataclysmic event that kills most life on the planet and can last for a very, very long time, is triggered by her friend Alabaster, who is the most powerful origin of her time. She is quite powerful herself, and she manages to save herself, but this very day she discovers that her son has been murdered by her husband, the boy's father, because the father found out he was an origin. So that's how much most humans hate origins. And Essun is devastated by her son's murder, and she's also desperate to find her daughter, the older child whom her husband has left their comm with. The comms are these agricultural villages where she has basically been hiding out. She didn't let people there know she was an origin because she knew the fulcrum would come after her to reclaim her, and she had already horrible experiences and barely survived the fulcrum's last effort to control her. Essun is such an interesting hero because she doesn't look like most sci-fi heroes or most depictions of goddesses. She's middle-aged, she's large, she's, this is the quote here in yellow directly from Jemison that describes her. She's brown skinned, she's got ropey fused locks. She's a very unusual kind of sci-fi heroine, and a very exciting one. So this next slide shows you some of the kinds of excitement that critics felt at her work. All three of these books pictured here won the Hugo Award for Best Work of Fiction for that year, 2015, 2016, and 2017. And they all absolutely deserved it. At least I think so. And many of her fans think so. Her work is very exciting for a number of reasons, not the least of which is this main character who's so unusual. And Essun is joined on her journey. So she leaves her comm in the opening pages or in the opening chapters to try to go find her daughter and revenge herself upon her husband who's killed their son. But the world isn't a season, so everything is in chaos and survival itself is extremely difficult. So she is joined very early on in her journey by another character named Hoa, whose name you see here. And these are some quotes about the kind of being Hoa is. He's what's called a stone eater. He's older. We eventually find out, many thousands of years old. And he's more powerful. He has the same kind of power as Essun and Alabaster, but much more of that kind of power. He's a godlike character, and he connects himself to Essun. We eventually learn, let's see if it's on the slide now. When she first sees him, he's had himself reborn through a crystal because he's a stone eater, he's a stone being, but he also can move, and he can move through the earth. And he presents himself to her as a child, as in this, all of the art in this is from fans of Jemison's that were online. When possible, I gave credit to the artists, but some of them were unsigned. And he's totally white, and he tells her, "I like you," and he consents her daughter, and so he's with her throughout the entire series once he joins her on the road pretty early on. We learn what stone eaters are, as in this big yellow quote here on this page, from these ancient texts that we eventually get access to. And we learn that there's a lot more going on from the ancient past that the people living in this time, thousands of years later, barely understand. So these obelisks, like the one depicted on the lower left here, surround the planet in a network known as the obelisk gate. And Essun can tap into it, as can her daughter, as can Alabaster, but not even origins, even powerful origins mostly can't. So she attracts the notice of the stone eaters, one of whom, Hoa, had been trapped in an obelisk that she frees from a position under the ocean. And her presence is exciting to them, and especially to Hoa. So this is a troubled world they live in. We find out Jemison engages many very important and relevant social issues, as does much speculative fiction. It's relevant to our world, or else we wouldn't be interested in it. So in Hoa's time, thousands of years ago, people with the kind of power like what Essun has, this orogenic power, were used to power the society. So they're literally like used like living batteries as slaves plugged into the earth. And then out of their DNA, this other group of people like Hoa are created as tuners who will control this obelisk gate. So they're going to draw even more power out of the earth to have even more complex technological society if the plan works. But when Hoa and his kind realize what's happening, they rebel. And their rebellion, the earth rebels as well, because the earth finds out is sentient and angry. So at the same time the tuners are trying to disrupt everything, the earth is also trying, and there's a big battle, and it ends up, the enormous power of this gate, the obelisk gate, throws the moon out of orbit. And so now the earth is really angry, causes the seasons, cause humans to have to really work hard to survive at all. And he turns the tuners into the stone eaters that they are, immortal beings, who will also have to feel what they've caused for eternity. So Essun gets transformed into one of these stone eaters by Hoa. This has been his plan all along, we learn, but it's confusing because she doesn't think so. She thinks as she taps into the obelisk and starts turning to stone that this is going to kill her, but she does it to try to save the world. She wants to bring the moon back to the earth, and also to save her daughter, whom she's finally reunited with at the very end, but her daughter is very angry at her for various reasons, and they battle. Essun gets totally turned to stone, seemingly dead. That leads her daughter Nasun to finally fulfill her mother's plan to use the gate to restore the moon and try to heal the earth. Essun is another complex character. Much like Circe, she does terrible things that she's horrified by. She also does really good things. So they're both these kinds of goddesses who don't fulfill the typical either romanticized or vilified extremes. Most goddesses in science fiction are horrible, horrible beings, forces of absolute destruction and chaos, or they're completely wonderful, perfect beings. These women are kind of both. They're somewhere on a much more complex spectrum that's more realistic, even though it's still fantastical. And when she becomes a stone eater, which Hoa helps her do, this is what she says: let's go make the world a better place. It's a very hopeful message. And this hopeful ending, along with the hopeful message in Miller, I would say are examples of this phenomenon known as hope punk. Hope punk is a weaponized form of storytelling optimism that's the opposite of grimdark. So grimdark is where everything's just awful and it's just going to stay awful. In hope punk, everything's awful the way it really is. Many of us think, since 2016. And it was in 2017 that Alexandra Rolland came up with this idea and wrote about it, that even in the face of these terrible, terrible things, you choose to try to still make the world better. You keep working. You don't lose hope. It's a mood and a spirit of weaponized optimism and kindness and self-awareness, being, like realizing gods are terrible. I don't have to be a god in Circe's case, or, we don't have to fight the earth. We can give the earth back its moon and try to make things better. in Essuy's case. So hope punk can now be applied back to works from the past, like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and many others, but it's also a really, really interesting new genre that is very exciting. And these science fiction women writers are so worth attending to. So thank you for paying attention.